to government orders. The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'm still pleased to rise today to begin debate on C-19, the ending of the Long Gun Registry Act. This is a great day for Conservatives across Canada. It marks the beginning of the end for a nearly 17-year-old legacy of waste thrust upon Canadians by the previous Liberal government. I know I speak for many of my colleagues when I say that this has been a very long time in coming. For years, many of us have stood in this place, even when we were on the other side, and took a stand for law-abiding hunters, farmers, and sports shooters. We repeated time and again that the Long Gun Registry was wasteful. It was ineffective. It did nothing to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Yet still, the parties that now form the opposition stood against us and stood against the law-abiding Canadians for whom we were standing. It's true that occasionally we found allies across the aisle, as long as they could be assured that their vote against the registry wouldn't actually result in the registry being dismantled. Those individuals ended up listening to their Ottawa bosses rather than standing up for the voices of their constituents. However, Madam Speaker, we are here today to look forward, not back. On May 2nd, Canadians gave our Conservative government a strong mandate to end the wasteful and ineffective Long Gun Registry once and for all, and this is exactly what we are doing. I would like to take a moment to discuss that mandate. I can tell you from personal experience that I have received literally thousands of phone calls and letters advocating a quick end to the wasteful and ineffective Long Gun Registry. I know from talking to my colleagues that they have had similar experiences. Conservative candidates from across Canada stood at doorsteps and spoke to their constituents. Time after time they heard people say, "When are you going to end the Long Gun Registry?" Specifically, I can tell you, Madam Speaker, the members from Yukon, Nipissing, Temiskaming, Sault Ste. Marie, and Ajax-Pickering heard from their constituents how important it is to elect a member of Parliament who stood against the wasteful Long Gun Registry. Now, there have been many discussions over what this bill will do and what it will not do. What this bill will do is ensure that law-abiding hunters, farmers, and sports shooters are no longer treated like criminals simply because they own a rifle or a shotgun. What this bill will not do is eliminate effective gun control. The fact of the matter is, and this is no secret, the Conservative government is committed to keeping our streets and communities safe. We have brought in measures to do just that. Specifically, we have brought in mandatory minimum sentences for gun crimes and targeted those who engage in dangerous criminal activity, such as drive-by shootings. We have also funded numerous programs through the National Crime Prevention Strategy that help stop gun crime before it happens. That is how we keep Canadians safe, through tough and effective laws and smart prevention programs, not through needlessly increasing red tape and targeting law-abiding Canadians. This bill also provides for the destruction of records held by the Government of Canada relating to the registration of long guns. And it would only make sense, Madam Speaker, if you're getting rid of the registry, you get rid of the registry. The registry is comprised of information. We're getting rid of that registry. The reason for this is a simple fact that we do not want to assist anyone to set up a backdoor registry. And as we heard from the NDP members during question period, they have clearly indicated that they will reimpose a long gun registry should they ever have the opportunity to enter into a coalition with the Liberals on that fact. The reason for this being unacceptable is that it focuses on law-abiding Canadians that should not have been targeted. This information, in fact, should never have been collected in the first place, and to maintain that the registry and the information is, in fact, a complete violation of law and the principles of privacy that all of us in this House respect. I would like to bring this back down to a fundamental truth. In rural Canada, oftentimes long guns are simply a part of everyday life. Whether it is owning hunting rifles for sport or using a shotgun as an everyday tool on the farm to protect your crops or livestock, there are a plethora of reasons that law-abiding Canadians would own long guns. As we have said consistently, long guns are not the weapon of choice for criminals. Primarily, criminals use handguns or other restricted or prohibited firearms, the registration requirement of which is not affected by the bill here today, and I would like to emphasize that. The current system imposed by the previous Liberal government and supported by the NDP opposition is blissfully ignorant of this fundamental fact. The Justice Minister who ushered in this proposal, Ellen Rock, even went so far as to state that it was his firm belief that the only people in Canada who should have firearms are police officers and the military. That is a frightening statement, and our government completely disagrees with this premise. Frankly, the fact of the matter is that there is no evidence that the long gun registry has prevented a single crime in Canada. Let's think logically about this for a moment. Is it reasonable to assume that thugs and criminals who have no problem committing armed robbery or other serious offences with firearms will sit down and fill out the paperwork? The response is obvious. It's a resounding no. Rather than preventing criminals, the long gun registry has actually created criminals. The opposition has frequently used the analogy of registering cars and boats or other everyday item. This is simply not an accurate analogy. If someone lets their car registration lapse, they do not contravene the criminal code, they do not receive a criminal record, and more importantly, they do not face the prospect of serious jail time. This is the case with the long gun registry. Again, I will state that reasonable people find this unacceptable. As I stated earlier, one of our government's main priorities is keeping our streets and communities safe. And I note the Canadian Police Association just came out with a statement saying that our government has received a mandate from the people on May the 2nd that they are moving past the issue of the long gun registry, and they want to work with us on issues like the ingredients of C-10 and the lawful access legislation. We, in fact, are committed to working with the police in that respect. Some proponents of the long gun registry maintain that eliminating it will cause anarchy. This, again, is simply hyperbole and is not the case. First and foremost, all individuals will still be required to be licensed to possess a firearm. We are committed to ensuring that only responsible and qualified individuals own firearms. Even after the passage of C-19, to obtain a license, individuals must still be able to pass the required Canadian firearms safety course and comply with safe storage and transportation requirements. They will also need to pass a background check, including a review of the individual's criminal record, any history of treatment for mental illness associated with violence, or history of violent behavior against other people. There will still be proper controls over restricted and prohibited firearms. We will continue to ensure that they are registered as we have for many years. So in essence, Bill C-19 retains licensing requirements for all gun owners, while doing away with the need for honest, law-abiding citizens to register their non-restricted rifles or shotguns, a requirement that is unfair and ineffective. Let's be clear, Canadian firearms owners are law-abiding members of our society and deserve to be treated as such. Burdening these citizens with unnecessary red tape and bureaucracy at the risk of a criminal record is not only unreasonable, it is unfair, and it is wrong. I recall the NDP had a solution. They were going to say, well, we won't make it a criminal record, we'll make it another offense. Realizing, of course, that once you no longer make it a criminal record and outside of the area of criminal law, it becomes unconstitutional. And so what they were trying to foist on Canadians was in fact an unconstitutional bill, a bill they realized was unconstitutional only in order to save this unfair and unreasonable legislation. Madam Speaker, we've heard loud and clear from Canadians who own long guns. They want the long gun registry eliminated, and they want to ensure that their private information is not distributed to others. And that's what's proposed under Bill C-19. What's proposed is therefore not a fundamental overhaul or scrapping of the entire licensing or registration system. Rather, what is proposed are changes that do away with the need to register legally acquired or used rifles and shotguns, which are largely owned by Canadians living in rural or remote areas. Put simply, we are scrapping the long gun registry just like we said we would do. We must have a system where we take effective measures to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. And this doesn't mean targeting law-abiding hunters, farmers, or sport shooters. That means putting more police on our streets, and our government has acted. It means making sure our laws are tough and effective. Again, our government has acted. Our government is determined to ensure that these law-abiding citizens are treated fairly while at the same time combating the criminal use of firearms and getting tough on crime. And this is really what the bill is all about before us today. It's about making sure that we invest in initiatives that work. It's about making sure we continue to protect the safety and security of Canadians without unnecessarily punishing people because of where they live or how they make a living. We have to ask ourselves, how do laws that penalize a law-abiding citizen on a farm or in the north help to reduce gun crimes in Montreal, in Toronto, in Winnipeg, or in Vancouver? The answer is clear. They don't. When we hear statements like, guns gotta go, folks, I'm for a full-out ban on these things from people like the NDP member for Davenport, or, and I quote again, to destroy the gun registry is to destroy lives, from the NDP leadership contestant from Outremont, it is clear that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of the issues at play in a country like Canada. I would also like to touch on the issue of cost. When the idea of registering long guns was first discussed, the Liberals said this would be a simple process and would cost no more than $2 million. And again, as I remember Alan Rock coming into my office when I was the Attorney General of Manitoba, and he said, Manitoba will enforce the long gun registry. And I said, Manitoba will not enforce a long gun registry. That is a law that the federal government will have to enforce because this is a bottomless pit. And at that time, Alan Rock said to me, then we'll sue you. And of course, Alan Rock is long gone, and the lawsuit never materialized. Unfortunately, the effects of what Alan Rock and the Liberals, and now supported fully by the NDP, have done continue on. And that is no understatement. The costs have ballooned to over $2 billion, as the state broadcaster CBC has reported. This is simply unacceptable. Over the years from 1995 until 2011, this money was spent on a program that did not save one life. Imagine how many police officers we could have paid, how many crime prevention programs could have been funded. The legacy of waste is shameful, and I'm proud to be a part of a Conservative government who is putting an end to this wasteful and ineffective boondoggle. I see that my time is coming to an end, so I'd like to sum up my arguments as to why all members should support this important legislation. First, The wasteful and ineffective long gun registry does not do a single thing to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Frontline police, notably the Canadian Police Association, agree with our government that the best approach to combat gun crime is to ensure tough and effective sentences. Secondly, the wasteful and ineffective long gun registry targets law-abiding hunters, farmers, and sport shooters, those who own guns as a part of their rural way of life or simply as a firearms enthusiast are treated as criminals because of this unbalanced policy. As a government and as a country, we must ensure that the measures we take on important public safety issues are effective. Thirdly, the costs associated with this program are inexcusable. $2 billion to implement a policy that doesn't do a whit to protect Canadians is simply unacceptable and must not continue. And most importantly, Canadians gave our government a strong mandate to end the wasteful and ineffective long gun registry. Canadians expect no less of us than to implement this key plank of our platform without delay. As I stated earlier, several former Liberal and NDP members are no longer in this place simply because they listened to their Ottawa bosses instead of their constituents. I call on all members opposite to listen to Canadians and pass this important legislation quickly. I would also like to specifically mention the members from Timmins, James Bay, Welland, Sackville Eastern Shore, Sudbury, Algoma, Manitoulin, Cape Cassing, Nickel Belt, Malpeque, Bonavista, Gander, Grand Falls, Windsor, and Avalon. You promised your constituents that you would stand in this place and oppose the wasteful and ineffective long gun registry. I hope that you will live up to your word. Once again, I would just like to reiterate the fact that Canadians gave our government a strong mandate to end this wasteful, ineffective long gun registry, and that is exactly what this bill does today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments.
Member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We know that when this government was elected in 2006, having campaigned on the same issue that they campaigned on this time, for 5 years, the government itself did nothing to either fix the problems of the register or bring forth the legislation that they did. And even when the private members' bills that were stalking horses for the government's legislative intent were brought forward, both in this House and in the Senate, greater measures were included to actually protect and have information be maintained on, first of all, the sale of guns by businesses. The records had to be kept, and also in transferring guns, that the individual transferring a gun had to notify and make sure that the individual to whom a gun was transferred was in fact licensed to have a gun. These are absent from this bill, and also contained in this bill, which wasn't in any of the others, was this destruction of records that the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police have specifically asked, and I have a copy of the letter dated the 19th of May 2011, for the use of the police forces in Canada to help them save lives and to trace guns, to keep the information and make it available to them. Why is this minister bringing in legislation that, in addition to the so-called getting rid of the long gun registry, is also weakening gun control protection in Canada, as well as destroying valuable records which the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police have begged the minister to keep, so that they can use that information as a tool to help save lives?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Difficult for me to point out all of the inconsistencies in the arguments made by my colleague across the way. Let me just start with the simple premise that he says the government did nothing, and in the same breath says there were all kinds of stalking horse legislation brought forward by the government. That's the kind of duplicity we can expect from the NDP on this matter, which we've seen them continue on a constant basis. In respect of the destruction of information, now let's get this clear. We are getting rid of the long gun registry. What is the long gun registry? The long gun registry is the information. So what the member across the way is saying, well, you know, just tell the Canadian people that you'll get rid of it, but don't really do it. That's what we're prepared to support. And that's exactly the kind of hypocrisy that Canadians have had enough of.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Bourassa. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today is an extremely dark day for Canada. It is a dark day, I think, for the victims of Dawson College. I think also of the victims of the Polytechnic. And we can try all we want to have personal attacks and to label people and say all the minister's rhetoric. But the reality is that there is information that the provinces do want to use. And the National Assembly talked today about it. The Quebec government talked about it, saying we want to have that data because if the Conservative government is unable to do its job, we know that the police do use this tool. It's an important preventive tool, and they want that information to ensure that in Quebec in particular, they're able to have their own gun registry in the province of Quebec. Why is the government stubbornly refusing to transfer that information, except that once again it's an ideological party that cares not a whit for anyone else except for doing what it wants to do and following its own ideology? Why not give that information to Quebec? $250 million was paid for by taxpayers. That's not your gun registry.
Minister of Public Safety.
Madam Speaker, I don't know how I can make this any clearer. Our government indicated that we would get rid of the long gun registry. The registry is nothing more than information. Information that deals with personal, private facts of law-abiding Canadian citizens. We said we would get rid of that. That is our commitment to the Canadian people. That's exactly what they're doing. And I don't understand what the member is saying. Now, yes, you promised the Canadian people one thing, but why don't you just allow it to happen through the back door? And quite frankly, we are not prepared to break faith with the Canadian people in respect to that issue. And what I can say, Madam Speaker, what the police have said, they have recognized, the Canadian Police Association, that our government received a mandate from the Canadian people on this particular issue. They said, let's move on and let's get Bill C-10 passed and the lawful access legislation passed. That will make a difference in fighting crime.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We've heard from the opposition that they want to reconstruct this registry if given half the chance. So I want, first of all, confirmation that all the records, all copies, all backups of the registry will be destroyed. I'd like to know when this will be done. And for the people who are now receiving renewal notices in the mail, do they have to complete those at this time in order to be compliant?
The Honourable Member, Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you. In respect of the renewal notices, as the member is aware, there's been an amnesty in respect of the long gun registry. One of the things that we were able to do by regulation when we came into government in 2006, as far as I know, that amnesty is still in effect. In respect of the information, Madam Speaker, the legislation is very clear. The legislation says the information must be destroyed, and we expect that any agency that has the documentation must destroy that. Otherwise, they're in breach of the law.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Gatineau. Thank you. With regard to that issue, what can the Minister of Public Safety say to the Quebec government, which said today that it intended to defy this bill before Parliament with regard to destroying the information as requested or set out in Section 29 of the bill? And as a province, it intends to continue with the registry. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Speaker, the information that was created under a specific piece of legislation. That legislation is being repealed, and the information that was collected is no longer lawfully in the hands of individuals when they have that information after the repeal of the legislation. We expect all law-abiding Canadians and agencies to follow the law.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Richmond Hill, a very, very brief question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we all know that criminals do not register their weapons. This has been an ineffective tool, if it is a tool at all. Perhaps the Minister can elaborate how much money has gone into this registry that is really not providing any real service to Canadians.
The honourable minister has...
Yes, as I indicated in my comments, the state broadcaster, CBC, stated that the cost was about $2 billion. And indeed, there is no evidence of that expenditure ever having saved one life.
Perhaps there is time for another very brief question. The honourable minister, the honourable member for St. John's East, very brief.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, the member spoke several times about how inexpensive this program was. We know what was wasted when the program was set up, but the RCMP says it costs $4 million a year to operate the long gun registry part of the gun control program. Any comment to that?
The honourable minister.
As I understand it, the Auditor General indicated a few years ago that the cost was approximately $70 million. I don't believe that the direct costs are that high. The entire cost of the long gun and short-armed restricted firearms registry, the direct cost would be somewhere in the range of $22 million a year. And most of the guns, of course, registered are long guns. But this doesn't, of course, take into account all of the indirect policing costs that are passed on to the federal agencies, provincial agencies, and municipal agencies. Perhaps that's where the Auditor General got the larger figure from.
Resuming debate, the honourable